Let's talk a little bit about video aesthetics. These are tips and strategies to help make your videos look a little bit better and things you can plan in advance for. When you're recording video, think about framing and composition. The first thing you want to think about is headroom, which just means that you leave enough space above the head so you don't kind of cut off at the forehead or cut off at the chin, or kind of an awkward framing on a human. Another thing to think about is in video tutorials, they're often centered horizontally, although it's not always the case, but it tends to look nice as long as you have a nice background around the outside. Another thing to think about is a very traditional rule of composition called rule of thirds. As you can see on the image on the left, the eye line is pretty close to being at the third line, and then the shoulders actually hit at where the third lines meet over on the bottom left and the bottom right. And then having the face perfectly centered down the middle. If you had a little more zoomed in shot, the eyes might be at the third and then the chin might be at the lower third. Just think about that as a pleasing way of making a composition. Over on the right, you can see a bad example, cutting off on the forehead and framed just off center so it feels awkward. So when you're framing, think about what angle on the subject would be most pleasing. Too low, right, from underneath isn't very flattering. Too high isn't very flattering either. It tends to have the best if it is eye level and kind of straight on for the best effect. Keep in mind that most of the web cameras you have available are on your phone, the camera on your phone, or some of the cameras that I recommended in the other section are wide angle, which means they're going to gather as much kind of a wider angle as they can get. Unfortunately, that also means that they have something called wide angle distortion, which is accentuated as it moves closer to the camera. So just don't get too close. As you can see, the image on the right is not a flattering distortion when the subject is too close to a wide angle lens. Always think about what is behind you, what's in the background, and if you can't have it, perfectly even, or as you can see on the top right, maybe a green screen or a backdrop, at least try to arrange it so it's not distracting. As you can see on the bottom example, there's some distracting stuff going on behind the subject, over his shoulder. You can even see a bag. There's some messy stuff. You don't want that. So what you want to have is something neatly organized in the background and not distracting. So also keep in mind that you want the background to be darker than the subject. So that's maybe one criticism you could make on the bottom right. All cameras have to focus on the image, and especially in darker situations, they'll have trouble finding focus for the entire image. So you want to make sure that the image at least is focused on your subject. One more thing to think about is turning off the automatic adjustment on your webcam, for instance. It's going to automatically try to find focus, and then throughout your video, it might change depending on shifting conditions. So sometimes you can get a webcam controller app, something like that, to turn off the automatic focus adjustment. Another thing to think about, a similar way, is the resolution, size, or the clarity of the image. As you can see, I have two examples on the left side that at this range the bottom one doesn't look great, but it looks okay. But if you look closer, right, if you're if you zoom in on a phone, or if you have a much larger screen, you can see there's a major difference in the clarity. The one on the left is both a lower resolution and it has been compressed. So you want high resolution, again, 1080p or something like that, HD or bigger. And you also don't want to lower the bit rate too much, which is the megabytes per second. So you don't want to lose too much information by compressing the video too much. One thing that compresses the video a lot is actually transmitting it over the internet. So if you are streaming video or you are on a video conferencing site, they often highly compress that video and get results a little bit more like this. So you want to record something that's cleaner and more clear. All light comes in different colors. Particularly, you'll notice the screen light comes in a little blue. Outdoor light, at least during most of the day, is very blue compared to the indoor light, depending on the type of light bulb. Traditional incandescent or tungsten light bulbs produce an orange color. As you can see, the background in this example photo is really orange compared to the blue on the subject, which is probably coming from either a nearby window or the screen itself. So keep in mind that different colors will come in different ways. You also probably want all one type of light if you can find it. And then you can adjust your webcam or camera what's called white balance in order to make sure the color temperature is all the same and that white equals white. So you can see there are some books that probably should be pure white, and instead they're coming in really orange. And if you look at her skin tone, you can see there's a lot of blue, extra blue in there. So you'd want to find where that white is for white balance. Also, you want to set your exposure correctly. Often cameras and webcams have automatic settings, which are great, for instance, for video conferencing and getting an image that's usable, but often they will shift and change. So you want to, again, get a webcam controller or something, or on your camera, turn off the automatic settings so that you can prevent it from shifting and causing flicker. Better lighting will always help this. As you can see in the example image, it could switch back and forth between these two levels of exposure because of that window behind the subject. The window is too bright, and so the camera is going to try and shift back and forth to try to get what it thinks is a proper exposure. It's just too bright versus too dark, and it cannot find the proper exposure. What'll help with that is don't have your subject backlit. Again, the one on the right's the same as the last slide. Backlighting it, particularly with a window like that and no indoor lights, is not going to work. Also, don't rely on the screen light itself. As you can see in the example on the left, the screen does not produce enough light to make a pleasing image. And in fact, it looks a little like a flashlight held underneath a face for a horror story, right? So you don't want it to be overly dramatic or seem like a campfire, right? You want it to be lit a little bit more evenly. And also, the background's important. In this one, all you have is darkness in the background, and I think that looks inappropriate for a video tutorial. So this is from a video tutorial that I recorded in a dark room, and we had a full lighting setup. So you can see that it's evenly lit. Again, maybe not perfect, but a lot better than the examples provided before, where you can see all the details. This was also shot on a green screen, so I replaced the background, and so that looks kind of nice instead of a bunch of distracting objects. To get that lighting set up, I used a very traditional Hollywood sort of idea. It's three-point lighting. You have a key light, which is your strongest light. You have a fill light to fill in the shadows from the key light. And then you have a hair light or backlight, which isn't as important for video tutorials, just provides separation from the background. But the really important parts of the key light and the fill light, watch how those come in on this. This is an image from a movie called Amelie. And provides kind of that nice contrast. So it doesn't have to be, if you go back to the previous slide, the perfectly evenly lit. You could also provide a little bit more dramatic lighting if you'd like to. But again, two lights coming in at about a 45-degree angle is going to create this effect on your subject. And then also the background, you can see how she's lit more brightly and has more contrast than what's going on in the background. And then that hair light, if you can see on the right side of her hair, kind of just provides that little rim of light that separates the subject from the background. Now, you don't have to use this 100%. You could actually do this all with one light, or at least most of this with one light, if you have a reflector, for instance. So you can see this example on the bottom left without the reflector. If you add the reflector, you can see you're getting an extra light over on the left side of the object. On the right side, you can see that this is what a reflector looks like, but you don't actually need a reflector. You just need something white that bounces the light. As you can see on the top example, one light and bounce it will bounce that light over to the other side, and then it's not as dramatic and creates a little bit more even lighting on a subject. When you're recording, you should always use some sort of stabilization. If it's a camera or a phone, I highly recommend that you use a tripod. If it's a laptop, just make sure that you have very securely located it and you're not going to bump the table and make the whole laptop bounce back and forth or something like that. Really increases the professionalism of your video. Great. Well, thanks for watching on our tutorial on making tutorials. We'll provide additional links and resources on the course page. But good luck with making your first tutorial. and let me know how I can help.